So, welcome to Inside the Lords, and this time we're inside the Lords, or we're at least inside the area where I've got an office. Look, I've got my name on a door. So this is a building that's opposite the old House of Lords, but it's part of the Parliamentary Estate, and we're now going in. Here is my rather untidy but empty office, my suitcase as I'm going home soon. I haven't been using it because of the lockdown, so there's not very much in it. I'm only beginning to build up a book collection. I'm working on my laptop. I'm supposed to be able to get a computer, but I haven't got it yet. And I wanted to draw attention to the fact that I've got this fantastic picture up, which is from Ali. So I want to say to Ali, who I know has had a terrible tragedy in her family with her brother dying, that this is for you, Ali, and I will think of you and all the support you've given me when I look at that. But I also wanted to draw attention to this, which is a gift that I received from Andy Argyle at the Buxton Battle of Ideas, where I hadn't seen him through the whole of the lockdown, and it says, "Goodbye EU, hello world." And he very cleverly has got a 50p coin from when actually we were joined, partly it was the kind of pro-EU coin, and also the one when we left. So that is a treasured possession. Thank you very much to Andy. Okay, I've got those thank yous out of the way. But anyway, yeah, so here I am in my office, and I want to just go through a few things that have happened this week. As you know, the crime bill is going ahead, and it's actually, as we speak, there's a big long debate that will go on till 10 o'clock tonight in the chamber, but all of the sections of the crime bill they're discussing today I'm not involved in. So on Monday there was a very important debate on the non-crime hate incidents that was put forward by Lord Moylan, Daniel Moylan, and I thought that it brought out in some ways, if you want, the best bits of the House of Lords, which is this is a number of Lords getting together using the crime bill to try and clarify something about these absolutely egregious and illiberal non-crime hate incidents, where the police effectively made up a category, can actually register and have registered tens of thousands of people in their database for non-crimes, but with the demonising label of hate attached to them, which means that you can be checked out by future employers. You don't even know you're on them. And so I use it as an opportunity to talk about the problem of that, and the problem, in fact, of hate crimes more broadly, because I think there's a broader problem, even when things are called crimes. So that was, but also everybody joined in, and when I say everybody joined in, there was all sorts of kind of law lords who supported Lord Moylan, and people who had never heard about these issues then it was drawn to their attention. And so at the very least it created a debate, a public debate, which I think is long overdue, and I thought that was well worth doing. I was really pleased when Baroness Butler-Schloss, I think that's how you say her name, who I've kind of been reading about her. She's very famous, particularly in family law, in all sorts of issues over the many years, and I'd never met her in real life, and she sat up and she said, "I just want to respond to Lady Fox," and I was absolutely terrified. I thought she was going to shout, and then she said, "Well," she said, "if what she says is true about the police guidance on these non-crime hate incidents, that guidance should be torn up now. The government should get onto the College of Policing and sort it out." So I was absolutely delighted. But anyway, that was kind of a very important discussion. Next week, when I come back, there's going to be debates about an amendment put forward on turning misogyny into a hate crime, and I will be arguing against that. I have a certain dread of that, because I think that won't be a very popular speech that I make, but I think it's very important that we do not allow women to be turned into victims. This misogyny hate crime amendment really will, I think, have a devastating impact on interpersonal relations and on free speech, and I'm going to oppose it, but I know that it won't be an easy thing to do. I also wanted to talk about something I suppose not related entirely to the Lords, but I just was doing some media this week. I did Any Questions last Friday. I did Politics Live on Monday on BBC Two, and I was in both instances critical of the orthodoxies and the dogma that's emerged around COP26, and particularly I'm alerted to the fact that the government, we've heard Boris Johnson 1 minute to midnight, all of the language is the language of emergency, the need to do something. And I think anyone who's just lived through the last 18 months of emergency legislation, the illiberal outcome of that might become anxious, even if they're environmentalist in their outlook. They might think, what's going on here? And I think that I've been surprised but gratified that there's been actually something of a public reaction against some of this, particularly when we're told the science, which is completely antithetical to scientific endeavour, by the way, that you have the science as though it's a dogma. When people say the science means you can't debate it, I think we should all be very alarmed indeed. And I think we've seen that far too much during the pandemic period, where political decisions are made and any challenge is closed down, censored or demonised because of the science. So I think the same thing is happening in relation to net zero targets. But when I did those media, when I went on the media and discussed all this, I had the horrible experience of trending again, on Twitter. And, I'm never trending because everybody really likes me. And most of the people who were posting about me, they weren't posting about anything I said. They were posting in reaction to the fact that I was even asked on to the programmes. They all wanted to challenge my scientific credentials. Why was I allowed to speak on this? I was called a climate change denier regularly. They wanted to challenge my credentials, but they didn't want to challenge, for example, the credentials of Lord Deebden, who is, people kept saying, you're an unelected peer, why should you speak? But they all supported Lord Deebden, who was on with me on Any Questions, even though he's an unelected peer. What right has he got to speak? And he's not a scientist either. It's also the case that the people who were on Politics Live with me were not scientists. They were politicians, and we were talking about politics. But it's always the people who go against the orthodoxy where they try and challenge you on your expertise. And it's really, I'm not complaining on my behalf, although I don't like the pylons, I don't like the abuse, I don't like the libelous, scurrilous things that people say about me. But it's more that kind of atmosphere where, although there should be a debate on this, anyone who attempts to raise any questions there's an attempt at shutting you down. I raise that because it was an unpleasant period on social media, a really nasty atmosphere. And, people say to me, well, you're thick-skinned, you can probably put up with it. But I'm going to tell you now, I don't like it. And especially, by the way, because people are abusive, and I just talked about misogyny. My God, they're personal. As people say horrible things about my looks. Vile things. And the reason I mention that is because I had an interesting experience this week of giving a briefing to another political party about the online hate crimes bill. And one of the things which that political grouping was discussing was whether the online hate it's the online safety bill, I'm getting confused. The online safety bill, which is going to come into the House of Lords in a few months' time, whether that will prevent the nasty and horrible remarks and kind of pylons that I've just experienced. And I was explaining to them that, first of all, it wouldn't, and that even if it did, that isn't really the basis on which we should give power to big tech to decide what we should and shouldn't read or shouldn't say. And I thought it was particularly frightening when we heard the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, saying that, online pylons of people being horrible to each other on Twitter could lead to 2 years in jail. That kind of threatening atmosphere can only lead to censorship. And I believe in free speech. And if with free speech you get abused, so be it. You just have to put up with it. In the end, it's only words. So that was interesting. But it was also interesting talking to a political grouping, and that I don't agree with particularly, but they wanted to kind of get my take on it. And I've actually found a refreshing thing this week has been the opportunity to work across the house, as they say, with different people they wouldn't normally have much contact with or wouldn't always agree with on different issues. I found that with the assisted dying bill, with that amendment on the police and crime bill. And I suppose it's quite refreshing that 1 minute you can be opposing each other and another minute you can be agreeing with each other, and that in a way should be politics without it being personal, without it being full of I refuse to work with you, the kind of sectarianism that we see with the usual toxicity of politics today. The only other thing that I want to finish off with is that parliamentary politics is more complicated than I'd thought it was. So there's been a big row in the Commons today about whether the government have, manipulated a situation to let a Conservative MP get away with having broken the standards codes, and whether they're going to try and change things to kind of let him off, and everyone's talking about it as a matter of corruption. I'd say it's slightly more complicated than that, because actually the standards committees that the government have set up over a period of time are not fit for purpose. And actually this would not let the MP in question off, but would just set up a new standards regime. And you could say, that's, they're just letting off one of their own. But I suppose I just want to say, don't quite ever believe the headlines or the kind of accusations, because it's not quite as simple as that. I really learned that lesson last week, and I didn't mention it, but I want to draw attention to it, which was the issue of the sewage in the rivers and the headlines of this. And actually it started in the Lords, where members of the House of Lords effectively accused Zac Goldsmith and the government of wanting sewage to be pumped into the waterways of the United Kingdom, and that they were trying to save it through a Lord's amendment. It then went to the Commons and was overturned because everybody in the Commons doesn't care about ordinary people, and they don't care about sewage in the water, in the rivers and in the seas. And when you dug a bit deeper, it was not like that at all. And one of the most despicable things that happened was that Andrew Adonis, Lord Adonis of Remain fame, amongst other things, effectively used the Environment Bill and that sewage amendment to basically bombard Zac Goldsmith and the whole of Twitter with misinformation, funny enough, which I don't think should be banned, but should be argued against, where he suggested that the sewage in the rivers was all to do with us Brexit, leaving the EU. This was going to lead to lower environmental standards. And he was taken to task by Zac Goldsmith, very roundly taken to task. He explained it had absolutely nothing to do with that, and it was more complicated than that. And the whole question of sewage and the Victorian plumbing that we have in this country, and the problem of the water companies and how they deal with a problem of basically out-of-date infrastructure, is one which is slightly more complicated than the headlines implied. And I'm not going to bore you with it, by the way. But I do think that what it's taught me is that I myself should just avoid the sound bites, should think a little bit more deeply, find out a little bit about what's going on before I kind of jump to any conclusion. I'd just like to encourage everyone else to do that. And I hope that sometimes the Inside the Lords gives you an opportunity to think, maybe I'll find out for myself, not that you have to believe a word I say. And all of this is is in the public domain. You can look at Hansard at all these debates, and you can also follow them on Parliament TV. My conclusion is that despite being back in the Lords and everything supposedly being normal, from Monday, for absolutely no reason whatsoever that I can ascertain, there's been a panic and a clampdown on normal behaviour in the Lords, and they've basically institutionalised now mask wearing everywhere. I've got my mask here because I can no longer walk around the building. So cases are falling, but on the parliamentary estate, they've started to panic. They've cancelled visits by groups of people. They've said that masks have to be worn all the time while walking around. I had people in for a cup of tea this morning, and they were kind of reprimanded and shouting at like children for not having a mask on, even though one of my guests is actually medically exempt. But it's the whole tone has changed. And I've been here a year when the pandemic was properly scary and they didn't mandate you wore masks. So I think there's a kind of irrationalism going on that really you know, is part of a kind of bit where you think the world's going mad and you can't, and you're so frustrated. And in contrast to that, the Academy of Ideas Battle of Ideas event in Buxton over the weekend on Saturday at the Dome in Buxton, organised in association with the University of Derby, was just such a refreshing, wonderful opportunity for the public to get together, maskless, without fear, and to discuss the big issues of the day. And it was really refreshing. And to just give a real shout out to the University of Derby that they sponsored the event because they wanted to be seen as a university that stood for academic freedom and free speech in a period when universities are tragically very nervous about standing up for free speech. And so it was great that they did that. But also to the hundreds of people who came to Buxton on Saturday, it was just such great, stimulating and invigorating to have your company, your intellectual insights, and for you not to be frightened of each other. And it was great to be out and about in the public square. And I really hope that Parliament calms down, gets rid of the masks, that we manage COVID as a manageable endemic virus, but that we stop frightening each other with these overzealous reactions. And if we don't, then you can be sure that the climate of fear that we're hearing about coming out of COP26 in Glasgow is going to become part of a way of life, and we shouldn't let it. So I'll speak to you next week more about the environment and whether I survive arguing against misogyny, hate crime.